Sorry. Okay, starting the lecture over again for those who weren't here and are watching this. Chapter 1. I won't make it real brief. Core issue. The core issue of project failure tends to be sociological. It's personal. It's not technological. And I love the third point up here. Most managers are willing to concede that they've got more people worries and technical worries, but they don't manage that way. What's for those of you who've been out in industry, what is it that the managers are usually wondering about? Oh, this new tool, we're going to switch to this tool, we're going to switch to this language, we're going to use this new API, we're going to use this new methodology. It's not, well, look, I've got these 10 developers, how can I best build them into a team and have them produce and use the strengths and weaknesses. One of the things that we're going to talk about later in Peopleware, not later today, later weeks, and also I think the next reading assignment for this week of mine is an article that Ruby Rayleigh and I did called for Cutter Consortium, a Cutter IT journal, called The Longest Yard, where we simply said it is more productive to think of a development team as a sports team than as a manufacturing facility. And we'll talk about that next week. But we focus on the technical and on the process and so on rather than human because it's easier to do. It's hard to manage people. How many of you have actually had to manage other developers? That is, work with them. What's it like? What are some of the problems you run into?
I feel like developers are pretty headstrong people. Like, we think we know a lot, and so it's pretty easy to get into.
Yeah, canonical joke, how many software developers does it take to change the light bulb? 32, one to do it, 31 to say, I could have done it better. Who else had a comment on managing developers? Yeah.
So I think one of the hardest things that I had was hiring people.
Yeah.
It was awful. Like
Well,
trying to make sure that people actually knew stuff and trying to make sure that they could actually learn that stuff that you needed them to learn is hard.
It's hard. Again, you know, Pages, it took me 1.5 years to hire basically 8 people. Because I was very picky. Of course, you know, we were also trying to raise funds and so on, so I didn't want to have a big team and have them sitting around and do nothing. But I went through a lot of people, as we talked about last week. A lot of resumes, a lot of phone calls, fair number of people coming in, and was slow to hire because that's a big commitment. Any other observations? Okay, next problem. Managers tend to want software to work like fast food production. Like someone on the grill, someone on the cash register, someone doing fries, and it's just going to be an assembly line, and the person doing fries will know how to do fries, the person doing hamburgers will know how to do hamburgers, and so on. And that's not what software development is like. So, you know, we're back to armor, and I'm keep coming back to armor. If you're doing exactly the same thing you know how to do, then what are you doing it for? There's no advantage to that. The advantage, the value in the software that you create or the new system you put in is it allows you to do something better than you were doing before. But that involves discovery, which involves trial and error, which involves wasted effort and dead ends. And managers don't like that. They want to punish that. They don't want to hear, oh, we've just discovered 5 different technologies that aren't going to work for this project. It's like, why don't you pick the one that does? We don't know until we get it in and try to experiment. Well, let's just take it and push ahead. We'll assume it works. That happens. It's kind of like, yes, we're going to adopt this. I mean, literally, I think I've already mentioned it. Eric. They had a mission-critical system that they were developing, not for themselves, but for a national telecom company, and they were using version 1.0 of a development system for a programming language that no one had ever developed in before. The reaction is, are you nuts? Are you absolutely nuts? This is insane. And it failed. common attitude management provides all the thinking, and the people underneath are just carrying out their bidding. This is sort of back to the don't they know they're dealing with grown-ups. One of the reasons why upper management tends to really have a profound suspicion about IT is because it usually happens when they themselves don't understand IT. And they can't figure out why some things are hard and some things are easy. And of course, as developers, we love to show off. So if they give us something that it's kind of like, oh, I know exactly how to do that. You know, there's an article in ACM, I can bam, 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 and you knock it out. And they think that's great, and everything's going to be like that. Keep this in mind. It seldom pays to be overproductive. I did a review at Capital One. They were putting in a brand new website to replace their old one for their credit card customers. And there was a lot. The project had all the usual problems and failures, and by sheer dint of effort and some good luck, the development group, was an internal development group, actually released it on time. And it was relatively stable. Now they incurred a whole bunch of technical debt, meaning there's a lot of stuff they said, we have to go back and fix this. But they got it up. So you know what management's response was? Great, let's do 2.0 and we'll do it even faster. Which was the point at which the developers brought OSG in, including me, to basically go up to management and say, no, that's not the way it works. You're setting yourselves up for disaster. And frankly, Capital One at that point had an outstanding IT group, excellent risk management, excellent developers, excellent architects, but management was asking the impossible. I ended up writing an article that talked about the risks of IT success. And the risk is when you actually pull it off, they think, oh, well, we can do that and we can cut even more. In fact, Peopleware, one of the chapters, talks about this one female IT project leader who was right on top of everything, was absolutely confident in her dates, and went back to upper management and said, okay, we can be done with this. I can absolutely guarantee that we'll be done with this on March 1st. And upper management's response was, great, we're moving the deadline up to January 15th. Because we think if you work harder, you can cut 2.5 months off of it. I mean, this sort of stuff happens. Just know. We have, once again, people are not interchangeable parts. Their relationship with each other matters. Dragging Stephen Covey, and I just looked at that and realized he spells it with a PH, not a D. We need to make sure we're not too busy sawing to sharpen a saw. I have pled with this in so many different forums. If you want to be a very successful manager, develop education budgets for your developers. Send them to a conference. Give them a budget to buy books. I mean, the upper management will say, oh, they'll just get smarter and they'll go get another job elsewhere. It's like, no. If you're not providing the education, they'll go elsewhere so they can learn what they want to learn. I mean, how many know people who have literally left one job for another because the new job had some new technology or something new that they wanted to learn or wanted to experience it? This happens, and you'll find yourself in that position. It's kind of, oh, I want to go do that. Now, see, I've already cured this problem. DeMarco Lister say the average software developer doesn't own a single book on a subject and has never read one. Bam, you will have read 3 by the time you get through this class. And with luck, you'll hang on to them because they're important books. Observations and feedback on any of this from your own experience. Questions? Anything? Yes? I'm sorry, your name again?
Catherine.
Catherine, that's right.
Just like the education budget, it almost seems like you just need education time.
Yeah.
So as you're working on projects and
Oh, yeah.
you're talking about like, well, we could, like there's all these really cool things we could, maybe they'll work for what we're working on, but you don't have time to try it, so you just stick with what you know, because you know how long that takes, but maybe if you had the time to learn these other things, you could apply them.
Yep, and that's actually touched upon, and I know we'll talk about this elsewhere. Another big source, my nose is tickling. If I sneeze here, I apologize. Another big source of failed projects is the decision to adopt some new technology or methodology for a mission-critical project. I mean, it's back to what I was just talking about at Arian. If you're adopting a new technology, new environment, new language, new engine, new methodology, whatever, do a pilot project. Most organizations will not spend the time to do pilot projects. We'll talk about this some when we talk about the longest yard article, because as those of you who are watching football Friday night discovered, if you're suddenly thrown into a situation that you're not ready for, things can be disastrous. But that's often what management does. They'll throw you into a new technology or methodology thinking it's going to improve things, whereas you're still trying to come up with speed, and it's actually going to slow things down.
So I'm failing to understand I guess almost the math of a pilot project. Because imagine, we're a small startup company or something. We say it would greatly aid us to use this new technology. But I mean, how do we afford to just create some small project which may or may not even work?
As a software company, well, I'll put it two ways. First, as a small software company, you may not be able to. Again, a lot of stuff I review are not small startup companies. These are, multi-hundred-million-dollar corporations and so on and so on. On the other hand, I can tell you from personal experience, as a small software company, you often end up doing that anyway. You launch with a particular set of technologies and you discover partway through, oh, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to either fall back to something else or switch technologies or do this. You run across one of those blind alleys that Armour talks about, and you're stuck. And that's why you have a high degree of risk in small startups. Unless you were very familiar, the advantage. Sometimes you guess right. Sometimes outside things, knock you in the head. But the advantage with small companies, with startups and so on, is that you will often reach that conclusion in a matter of days or weeks, or maybe a few months. But you'll often see in large corporations, oh, we're going to adopt this new technology, and they'll spend a year and a half on it and then abandon it. So, good point. I mean, this is why it's risky business. Vienna waits for you. This is basically, the chapter is on the cost in terms of personal lives of forcing developers to work overtime. I really like a billboard. I see this when I'm coming back from Salt Lake down around Pleasant Grove. There's some software company that has billboard advertising, come work for us. They said, you can code and still go home to your families at night. Far too many organizations, big or small, and small you sort of expect it, but a lot of big organizations rely upon the heroic/death march methodology. We're going to put a lot of programmers on it, and they're going to work 70 hours a week of unpaid overtime, and then we'll get the project done, which end up doing is burning people out. Yeah?
Weren't you just sharing a story about something you were shipping? You saying everyone was working 70 hours a week, but it was a big success?
Well, yeah, we did. Actually, at Pages, I probably, for the first 3.5 years, averaged 70 hours a week. When we finally shipped after 3.5 years, my reward to myself was I stopped coming into work on weekends. There were some stretches in there where I hit 90 to 100 hours. And I'm not sure that I would do it again. Because this was a period of time when my wife and I were raising our teenagers, and I just wasn't home. be quite frank, if I could roll back to the mid-1990s, I would either put strict limits on the time I put in, or I'd simply find a more 8 to 5 programming job. My goal was we're going to win the Geek Lottery. We didn't. I did get 2 books out of it. It sort of launched, I got 2 books out of it, which in turn launched my consulting career and so on and so forth. But I still have significant regrets over not being there through those 5 years. And I think there are repercussions I'm still dealing with to this day with our kids, with a few of them at least, for that. And it was really rough. You have to understand, my wife and I were married previously. We had 9 kids between the 2 of us. Didn't have all 9 living with us, but we had usually 7 kids living with us. So she had a real burden through those 5 years.
I have a question.
Yes?
So if you're working in a place that's consistently asking you to work like 70-hour weeks, and you're just not willing to do that, is often the only solution just to
Find another job.
Find another job.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, my daughter Crystal, Solution Reach has been very flexible with them about working from home and so on. And when she talked here to the class during winter semester, someone said about how many hours a day do you work? And she said, well, you know, it really comes to about 6 or 7. I said, Chris, you may not want me to post your video because I'm not sure your management wants to hear you saying that. But she's productive. She's achieving all her goals. They just gave her a big raise to keep her. I mean, a big raise to keep her. Along those same lines, you know, at Pages, we were working long hours, and we had developers who would come in late in the morning, who would take 2-hour lunches, but they were there working till 9 or 10 each night, mostly because, again, we're going to talk about meetings and email and phones and so on, we were more productive when the rest of the company left. We'd all just sit in our offices and code and occasionally get up and, you know, send emails to each other, play things over each other's computers, whatever. And I had the CEO and CFO sort of, well, you know, why are they taking 2 hours for lunch? And okay, Larry, John, these guys are working 70 hours a week. I could care less. When they come in the morning, I could care less how long of lunch they take. What I care about is that they're getting the work done. They're getting their work done. But yeah, it really does boil down to, you know, and part of it was the idea was glamorized during the creation of the original Macintosh back 82, 83, it was launched in early 84, because the Mac development team had t-shirts that said working 90 hours a week and loving it. And that sort of became the cool thing in Silicon Valley, and that's lasted for over 35 years now. And it's for most cases, I mean, and I've done it. And one case I burned out, the other case, frankly, I got through Pages just fine. But it's not a sustainable methodology, yeah.
I remember reading, or not reading, but watching a kind of interview with young Bill Gates about his startups and his work ethics and how his team kind of came together and built Windows. And they did something similar. A lot of them would sleep in their offices and they'd go out for pizza and soda, and that was essentially it. But for a lot of single guys who didn't have families and were just young and had good health, that was okay.
Yep.
But if you have a family or you have other priorities, then that becomes difficult. And so I think the problem is that management who grew up, who's now probably in their late 30s and 40s and older, are like, well, this is what Bill Gates did. It should work just great now.
No.
But the development mindset has grown since then.
Yeah, I don't buy that. And I've done that. I've literally worked 40-hour shifts programming. Where I've gone into work at 8 in the morning, programmed all day, programmed all night, programmed the next day, went home, went to sleep for 8 hours, went back to work. It's not sustainable. And it's not always, and this is a lot of what DeMarco Lister are going to say, it's not always productive. Your actual productive time starts to degenerate after a certain amount. Is there a hand over here?
I got a question. Was it
Oh, sure.
was it in the Mythical Man Month that he was saying that if you do that, then you basically incur a debt, and so like, you know, if you work 20 hours overtime one week, you know, that next week you have 20 hours of basically wasted time with people recouping. Was that not Middle Month, or is that?
No, that's Peopleware.
That's
And
Peopleware,
we'll,
okay,
we'll
yeah.
talk a lot about that. Their basic contention is really it's hard to get more than 40 hours of actual coding time out of a developer in a week. I've done more than that. I've been productive more than that, but I generally agree with them.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a sustainable approach because the stress just builds up.
Yeah.
And I think back when we were having problems with pages, it was exactly because of, the time pressures. Quality of time permits, this is the other thing, and going back to Brooks, remember he said 50% of a typical software project is spent in testing and quality assurance whether or not you plan for it. And I see this is why so many projects are late. They get to that 90% point and they have so neglected quality that they spend an equal amount of time trying to get it completed. That's the 90-90 rule. You know, 90% of the project takes the first 90% of the schedule, remaining 10% takes the other 90% of the schedule. That is a truism. And the problem is that quality is seen at best as a second-class activity in software engineering, and it's so wrong. And this has been a hobby horse I have been riding for over 20 years. The time you spend in software quality assurance pays off, and management doesn't want to believe that. They think testing is something you do for a couple of weeks just before you ship. We'll have a whole set of lectures on quality assurance. Parkinson's law, work expands to fill the time allotted. This is often used as justification for putting a lot of work on developers. You know, if you give them too much time to do the work, they'll simply take that much time to do the work. And this is back to, don't they know they're dealing with grown-ups? Most developers actually want to get their work done and move on to something else. You know, you don't want to spend 3 weeks working on the same piece of code because you can't get it working. You want to get it done and move on and make something else work. Management tends to not understand that and think that we have to heap lots of work on the developers in order to get them to work sufficiently hard. Laetrile, this is sort of his chapter. That's the equivalent of no silver bullet. How many people know what Laetrile is? It's an extract from apricot pits that was touted as a miracle cure for cancer back in, I think, the late 80s, early 90s. It didn't, obviously. But managers are always looking for the equivalent of a miracle drug, silver bullet. You know, some new trick that can send productivity. Well, if we just, you know, back 25 years ago was object technology, which is why I wrote Pitfalls of Object-Oriented Development. Now, you know, you have things like DevOps, you have Agile. So if we just do this, you know, our productivity is going to soar. No, it's the fundamental issues of invention. You go back to Armour, you go back to Brooks, and you find ways to be more productive simply to cut your time and to improve your quality, but you're not going to get any magic results out of it. You know, changing languages or methodologies will give you huge gains. No. We have so much to do, you have to be twice as productive as this. Well, you know, certain work can only be done, you know, again, back to Armour, certain work to the extent that involves any degree of invention or discovery is going to take time that you can't necessarily predict. Can you automate away your developers? This is, of course, what we talked about a week or two ago about AI. AI is going to replace programmers. No, it's not. They've been touting, you know, AI, 4GLs, everything else. The baseline keeps growing because we have better and better sort of, we're starting off with an operating system, and this, you know, this, if you're doing games, you know, I've got the engine I'm using, I've got this, and so on. But when it comes to that thing that you're trying to separate out, that inventive portion, that becomes a very intense and difficult and non-guaranteed human interaction. There have been a lot of software products that have failed, that have been attempted and failed because they discovered somewhere along the way we just can't figure out a way to do this to make it sufficiently successful. Your people will work better if you put them under a lot of pressure. We've already addressed that. Any questions on any of this that we've talked about so far? Yeah.
So I've never worked with upper management before, and we're definitely outgrouping them a lot in this conversation in a negative way. I'm just curious, how much do they work per week, would you say, on average? So
You know, that's a good question. They tend to be, I mean, I think about startup, I think about Pages, Larry and John tended to be, and Rand all tended to be pretty much 8 to 5 type of guys. You know, it was the developers who were working the long, long hours. But you do have upper management who can be workaholics, which often in itself can be a problem. Because they think, well, we can do this, this, and this because we work 80 hours a week, therefore all our developers should too. When the nature of the work is quite different. But no, if I had to characterize it, it's more often sort of the, well, you know, I'm the CEO and, you know, I have the great strategic vision and so on, and it's up to the developers to make this happen.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I also
And I've actually worked, I mean, I have tremendous respect for Larry and John. And I learned a tremendous amount from both of them. But I sure butted heads with them a lot. And I've had that elsewhere. I'm sorry, you're starting to say.
No, you're good. I don't think it's just upper management that like portrays these characteristics. Like, I've been approached by a lot of business students that just treat me as a commodity and think I can get like some work done, and they want to accept all the profit from my labor when, you know, they want like 90-10 split on like startups. It's going to be me doing the work.
I have this, it's kind of like the classic and complaint you'll hear among authors, particularly fiction authors, is, I have this great idea for a novel. Why don't you, I'll tell you the idea and you write the novel and we'll split it 50-50. And the novelist just laughs and said, no. I have more ideas than I know what to do with. That's not the hard part of writing a novel. Hard part, and speaking as someone who's completed his first novel after having a lot of nonfiction books, it's, oh, thank you. I'm finally starting to get sort of good at it. I've got about 165,000 words in this. Got one more chapter that I'm waiting on Bruce to write, but it's a whole nother experience, and I don't lack for ideas. The idea for the novel came to me at a conference in San Francisco 7 years ago, and it's taken me this long to sort of catch up on that. So it's not like, oh, hey, you know, I've got this great business idea. We'll do software with this, and you write it, and you know, I'll get all the money, and I'll pay you something here. And no, it doesn't work that way. Anyway, yes.
What would a good like split be that you like from your experience? Someone like approached like that?
Well, I'm not sure I would do a split like that. If I were to do anything, I would say, okay, this is a startup. We're going to organize it as a startup, and my propensity would be equal shares all around, at least for among the founding members. And then as other people get brought on, it becomes an issue of, okay, you know, to entice them, we have to give them this much, or they're willing to come in for this much. So each new person that gets added gets diluted. And one of the reasons why venture funding is so nasty is because venture capital will come and say, oh yeah, we want 60% of the stock for this. So suddenly all your stock is diluted, and what used to be, you know, 10% of the company is now like 4% of the company. And so. Yes. Yeah.
So they were talking about how changing languages and mythologies, the false spot that it gives you with games. So it would be because I feel like there are some projects you do in a particular language just to have advantages over another, or even methodologies, depending on the project would be better suited for one versus another. So
Well, yeah, it could be better suited, but the question is, do you already know it? In other words, if I'm doing a critical project, I've never programmed in Swift. Okay? If I'm doing a critical project, and I say, I'm doing a critical project, and by golly, I'm going to use Swift for this. I have my entire learning curve with Swift that I have to go through.
And your first project that has to fail.
And my first project that has to fail in. I'm all the mistakes that I'm going to make in Swift. And you know, and I've programmed in, you know, professionally in at least a dozen different languages. It's not hard for me to pick up a new language because it's kind of like, okay, this, and this is how this works, and this is how this works, and so on. But if I were doing a startup and, well, at Pages, we were all doing Objective-C. I was familiar with Objective-C, and one or two of the engineers I was hiring were familiar with Objective-C. No one else was, and I had to factor that in. Some of them weren't even, you know, familiar with object-oriented development. I had to factor that in as well. So it was sort of a known cost and risk in the project, but that was, at that point, we were doing it for the next up operating system, and that was the only language you really had to use. So that was something forced upon. What I'm talking about here is when you have managers who say, yeah, we've been doing all our coding in C#, and we're going to switch over to, you know, Python, and that's going to suddenly give us huge gains in productivity. Well, no, it's not. It may eventually give you gains in productivity, but it's not going to, you're still going to have that learning curve. You had a question in the back at Matthew. Yes.
I was just going to say, should we be considering our class projects as critical or non-critical?
No, this is experimental because you don't have to finish the coding
Right.
here. So if you're using this as a chance to learn languages, God bless you. It's a great opportunity. Yeah, Matthew.
Speaking of both class projects and the learning new things, I mean, in your story, you said you and a couple other engineers do Objective-C, and let's say in our class project, 3 of us know the environment that we're working in.
Uh-huh.
How do you then, you know, sort of try to distribute that knowledge?
That's a good question. And particularly since you're on such a tight time frame. Here are a few thoughts. When I got pulled into AirInc because they were having problems with their Iridium subsystem, network management subsystem, they were also supposed to be using, Motorola had mandated object-oriented development, and no one there had any real expertise in object development. So I had to come in and not only do an architecture, I did a C++ coding standards and guidelines document for the group, so that everyone was actually writing C++ the same way, and did some fundamental training on concepts of object-oriented development. So if you're adopting a technology that some of you know and others don't, but have to work in, I would consider taking the time, it doesn't have to be lengthy, but establishing your coding standards and idioms. This is how you do it, this is how we're going to do this, this is going to be our approach, simply to get that out of the way and make it easier to pick up each other's code. And then you have to figure out how you're, you know, it's like, well, here's the manual, go learn, you know, Python, or go learn, you know, Quake Engine, or whatever, sorry, I'm old. Whatever you're learning, but, you know, but you're going to have to take that into account in your schedule. That people are going to have to come up to speed, and you have to figure out, is there a way we can redistribute the load so that those who are coming up to, who do have to work in the technology but are not familiar with it, have a chance to come up to speed and do things that are easier, while those of us who are actually experienced can carry the real heavy load, at least for the first week. It's not like we got a lot of time here. Anyway. Any other, sorry, that's all gone on longer than expected. Let's take a 10-minute break, start at 25 after. We'll talk about PERT and Gantt charts, and then the rest of the time will be team meeting.
There's not a